Welcome to our lesson on how to get the most out of this Excel course in the least amount of time possible. Now, you already have a written document in this lesson. If you go to the Files and Resources link, click there and download it. So I'm not going to repeat everything in here. Instead, I'm going to go through the 4 different use cases that we have for this course and just add some additional commentary on how to get the most out of this if you have a limited amount of time available. So these 4 cases we're looking at, number 1 is what to do if you are cramming at the last minute for interviews or modeling tests. Number 2, what if you already know something about Excel, but you really want to improve your skills and learn some of the more intermediate to advanced features. Number 3, what if you're new to Excel and you want to master it? And then number 4, what to do if you've completed the older version of this course, which was around for around 4 or 5 years before we updated this, and you only want to take advantage of and go through the new lessons. And then we'll go through some other points at the end. So let's start with case number 1. What if you're under extreme time pressure? Well, as I say here, no one is going to care about formatting. Questions and case studies about charts and graphs and VBA and macros, user-defined functions, things like that are also unlikely to come up. So bottom line is that you should skip or at least not pay a lot of attention to module 3, and then also modules 6 and 7 are going to be the least likely to come up here. Now if you're at this level and you've gotten an interview where they're actually giving you an Excel test, chances are that you probably have some previous exposure to Excel. So in this recommended lesson completion order, I am mostly saying here that you should skip the module on navigation and data manipulation because I'm assuming you already know a lot of that. Now, if you really don't know how to use Excel, then yes, you should still go through the lessons there, but in all likelihood at this level, you probably already know how to navigate around, how to edit cells, how to use references and anchors and things like that. Now, as I say here, the 2 most common case studies to get in tests, the 2 most common modeling tests really are, here's a 3-statement model, fix the formulas and link it properly, and then here is a bunch of data. We want you to sort it in some order or look it up and manipulate it in some way to create some type of useful output. So the bottom line is that any type of case study you get, any type of Excel modeling test is going to be very heavily weighted toward formulas over everything else, which is what I recommend focusing on when you go through this course. Now, this first part about the 3-statement model, being able to fix this gets into financial modeling material, which we don't really cover in this course. So you will want to look at the financial modeling fundamentals course for some examples of that. Take a look at the bonus case studies there, and you'll get some pretty good examples of what to expect in these types of case studies and how to think about the actual finance behind it. So for the actual order here, as I said, you want to skip modules 1 and 2 because first off, they're not going to be as relevant for case studies. Second, these are really features and functions that you're going to use with everything else anyway. And then third, I'm assuming you already know them. The one on formatting, actually, you may think it's optional, but some of this can be helpful, particularly the lesson on how to color code your financial models properly. You may not even have time to do that depending on the type of test they give you, but it's good to know this anyway, and it can actually help you out and end up saving you some time if you set this up properly and do this efficiently. The ones on cleaning up data, sorting and filtering data, again, they're probably not going to test you on that explicitly, but some of the functions we cover in lessons 9 and 10 here may come up in the context of other case studies. Module 4 I would skip unless you don't know how to group and hide rows and columns already. The one on formulas is what I really recommend focusing on, and especially these 3, financial functions, lookup functions, and index, match, and indirect. Out of all the case studies I've seen, these are the areas that you're most likely to get tested on. So they could tell you, for example, okay, here is a large file with a lot of VLOOKUP or HLOOKUP functions. What I want you to do is to go in and to rewrite it and use index and match instead. And in these lessons, we go through examples of this. We see some actual lessons and examples here that were inspired by real case studies. So pay very close attention to these, and you want to spend most of your time on these. If you already know financial functions such as IRR and NPV, and also how to calculate mortgage payments, depreciation, and so on, this one will not be as helpful, but I still recommend reviewing it because it could come up in case studies. Then these others, these are a little bit more optional. I'm just including them because in any type of modeling test, whether it's a 3-statement model or an LBO model or evaluation, sensitivity tables are good to know, as are circular references and iterations. And then of course, if your formulas go wrong, you want to know how to be able to track down that error. The one on charts and graphs, I would skip this. In all likelihood, they're never going to ask you to create your own chart or graph in a time pressured case study. Now, if you have a take home case study where you have a couple days or a week or something like that to complete it, they could ask you to do that, in which case this one on creating the valuation graph, the so-called football field graph, could be very useful. And then finally, I would skip this module on VBA and macros. It's just not going to come up in the context of a time pressure case study. So that's what you do if you're in case number 1 here and you have very minimal time. Maybe you only have a few hours to prepare or a day or two. This is what you might be able to reasonably get through in that amount of time that will be immediately useful. And again, I would stay focused on the 5th module and specifically these lessons with very likely to come up in modeling tests right next to it. So now case number 2. What if you already know something about Excel but you want to improve your skills and look at the more intermediate to advanced level material? So in this case, let's go through it module by module. The first one, you're looking at the 4th lesson in the first module right now, but I actually also recommend looking at the 2nd lesson, especially if you're attempting to use Excel on a Mac, which I don't recommend. I always recommend, even if you're using a Mac, installing Windows and just running it in parallel, because a lot of the shortcut keys are different, and also a lot of the shortcut keys simply don't exist in the Mac version. So pay close attention to this, and if you do want to run it on a Mac without doing a dual boot and installing Windows and the PC version of Excel, we go through some of the key setup and steps you need there. Now this one on navigation and data manipulation, most of this is pretty straightforward, and really this material is not even intermediate or advanced, but I'm including it here because we cover some alternate methods for doing some of these things, like inserting, editing, and deleting rows, columns, and cells. We cover a few additional points about absolute and relative references and naming and jumping to cells. So these could be very helpful even if you already know this material fairly well. The next module on formatting, you'll see that I have a lot of these lessons here, and the bottom line is that the formatting module, formatting is just so important for everything you do in Excel, especially in investment banking. But even if you're working on the buy side and formatting isn't as important, you'll still need to know this type of stuff, because even if your models and your output doesn't have to look pretty, well, you still want to color code your financial models. You want to be able to do that. You're still going to have to manipulate dates and time all the time, even if they don't look good. Custom number formats are very powerful and very helpful in a wide range of scenarios. You're going to have to be able to manipulate text to clean up data. So bottom line is that even if you are in a role where they don't even care what your models look like, formatting in this sense is still very important, because we actually go well beyond just traditional formatting in this lesson into a lot of things that are useful in other scenarios. And then of course conditional formatting, the exercise, those are both going to be helpful for the same reasons. Display and printing, so here there's a chance you could already know some of this, and again, these are not what I would all consider intermediate to advanced level lessons, but I'm listing them all here because again, we go through some nuances and some different angles for all these. So there's a chance you will learn something new, especially when it comes to printing. We go through a couple of the options there and some of the steps required to set up some of the options and features that are a little bit more complicated or aren't immediately obvious. Now the one on formulas, just as with the first case, I recommend spending the bulk of your time here because this is really where you're going to gain the most. This is where you're going to learn the most and what is really going to take your skill set from beginner to intermediate up to the advanced level. So the ones on financial functions, lookup functions, and index, match, and indirect, those are important for similar reasons. They're always going to come up. You really need to know how to use them well in any role, and they're especially likely in case studies. Copying and pasting and moving formulas, this is really more of a time saver, but it could be very helpful, and it's really important to understand how to do that efficiently. And then these other functions, these other lessons down here. So I've been over some of these in the first use case, but the bottom line on these is that none of these is especially complicated, but knowing how to use all of them is going to save you a huge amount of time and is going to help set your models and your work apart from other people's. So with transpose and array functions, for example, you'll learn how to save a lot of time when manipulating data, when running models, when creating graphs. So these are important to know in that context. And then scenarios. So a lot of people want to build in scenarios into their models and data sets, but they don't know how to do it properly. We go through 3 different methods here and teach you the trade-offs and how to use each one. And then some of these others, such as error checking formulas, sensitivity tables, goal, seek, pivot tables, these are really for looking at different cases in your models and making sure that it works correctly and making sure that if there's an error or something doesn't work, you handle it appropriately with the correct message. So they're all good to know. And again, if you happen to know something on this list or you already know one of these very well or several of these very well, just feel free to skip over it. Graphs and charts, we have 9 lessons here. I've only listed 4, and I've attempted to focus on the ones that will be the most immediately applicable to what you do in banking and finance. Combination charts, this is very easy if you have Excel 2013 or onward. If you do not, it is more difficult, and so you should pay more attention here. Creating graphs for valuation metrics and multiples, this is always good to know, as is the football field graph and then the price volume graph. These are probably the 4 most common graph types that you will create as an analyst or even as an associate in these fields, so that's why I've listed them here. And then VBA and macros, as I say, this is really more optional. Really the most useful one here is the first lesson because you're always going to be recording and editing macros. This is useful for something like automating a lot of the formatting that you normally have to do manually. So with that example of color coding financial models, blue, black, and green, we go through in this module, actually not specifically in this lesson, but we go through in this module an example of how to actually create a macro for that and how to automate much of the process there. So this module can be useful, but it is probably a little bit more geared to what you do on the job and some more advanced cases that could come up. So go through it, but if I had to pick one lesson, I would focus on the first one in Module 7, VBA macros. So that's use case number 2. Now use case number 3, you're completely new to Excel and you want to master it. Well, here the answer is pretty easy. You complete all the lessons on the site if you want to master it and really know your stuff. And I really don't have too much more to say over than that. The key point is that this course has been designed specifically for this. We assume that you start out knowing nothing and then go through everything so that at the end you really do master it. So make sure you go through it in the order specified. And again, you could potentially skip the last module on VBA and macros, but again, even with that, even if you decide to skip it, I would still go through this first lesson on how to record and edit a macro. So let's use case number 3, what to do if you're completely new, which is relatively easy to explain. And then finally use case number 4. So if you have joined this site and you joined very, very early on when the first version of the Excel course was released, you might have been through that. Or even if you joined more recently, you might have been through the older version of the course. So what is new and what is different in this version versus the older one? So what I've done here is listed all the lessons that cover new topics or which add significantly to the existing topics from the old course. You can read through this yourself, but I'll just go through the very high level key points right now. The first module, you may think that this is easy or that you don't really need to go through it, but actually I would say it's pretty valuable to go through this lesson and then the previous 2 on setting up Excel and the tour of the interface because we do clarify some key points and answer a lot of the common questions that we have received over the years on just using Excel in the first place. The next one on navigation and data manipulation, a lot of this is similar, but the difference is that the examples are more in depth, you get more practice, and we also cover different angles and some different important points on several of these points. In the older course, absolute versus relative references and anchoring cells, that was covered, but it was done in the context of introductory lessons on formulas. This time around, we're addressing it separately because it's such an important topic that it deserves to really be addressed separately. So the focus is different, the examples are better here, and I would actually recommend going through at least these 3 new lessons. The next one on formatting, the main difference here really is that we're covering a couple new topics such as dates and time, importing, exporting data, text manipulation, data tables, giving you an exercise at the end, and then also there's a lot more emphasis on the Alt-H menu within Excel. In the older version of the course, a lot of our students were still actually using Excel 2003, believe it or not. This time around, we're sort of assuming that you are no longer using it, and we're assuming that you're using one of the newer versions from 2007 and onward, which all have a pretty similar interface for the most part. So the Alt-H shortcut combination there makes it a lot easier to access many of these formatting functions, and we go through that and focus a lot more heavily on all the time-saving features and shortcuts there. Display and printing, this is fairly similar. Some of the shortcuts are new, but the printing exercise will probably be the most useful part for you. And then formulas, so we cover a bunch of new things here. Financial functions, this is new. We sort of covered it last time, but we did so in the context of other lessons and formulas and functions. Index, match, and interact, once again, we covered this briefly last time, but in the context of another lesson. This time we have a dedicated lesson and a whole separate case study for this one. Database functions, brand new. Transpose and array functions, pretty much new. Error checking is pretty much new, and so is goal seek. And then graphs and charts, this entire module is new, so you should go through the whole thing if you really want to learn these in detail. And then VBA and macros, again, this is also new, and you should really go through this in detail if you want to learn how to use these features efficiently. We also cover things like user-defined functions, as you can see, how to create dynamic charts, and custom keyboard shortcuts, although we also covered that one in the old course. So that's a quick overview of what to do if you've been through the old course, you're signing up for this, and you want to see what to focus on and what exactly is brand new. And then a few other points down here. Do complete the quiz questions. I didn't add these just for fun or just to make the videos take longer to complete. I added them because as you go through videos, it's very easy to sort of drift off and not really be paying attention. But with these quiz questions, you're forced to pay attention because you can't even advance until you answer them. So you should definitely answer these, otherwise it defeats the purpose. And similarly, you should complete the Excel exercises in each lesson. You have before and after files for each lesson. And again, it's very time consuming to set it up like that. I didn't do it just for fun or for my own health or anything. I did it so that you can practice with it and really learn and absorb the material. So if you're in a real time crunch, okay, then you don't have to actually do it. Maybe you just watch the lessons then, especially if you're just refreshing yourself and you already know Excel. But otherwise, I really recommend going through and actually completing the quizzes and all the files and exercises. So that's it for this overview of the course and how to get the most out of it with the least amount of time, depending on what background you're coming in with. With this done, now we're going to move into the second module and get started with some of those shortcuts on basic navigation and data manipulation. You'll get a good background of that, and then we'll move into all the modules afterward.